if you have any kind of a business that relies on one individual, it's not a business, it's a job.
So the question here is, how do you make it financially sustainable?
If you double the size of the employee base and you double the size of the revenue and your bottom line is the same, I don't call that scaling. You're still scaling, but maybe not in the direction you want.
How long did it take you to recover from that and say, okay, we're going to tackle this?
Okay, recover mentally? Never. Did I stop and ask myself, why do I want to scale? No. I mean, who doesn't want a bigger company with more employees and more money? And right? Oh, did we fall flat on our face? We fell hard. I can sit here and I might seem wise because I have lived through it, but let me tell you, when I was going through it, I wasn't that wise.
Welcome to the Go, Go, Grow podcast, where we share practical advice and growth strategies for scaling B2B businesses. My name is Dasha Tishlik, and I'm the founder of Stratcraft.
My name is Michelle Page, founder of Sales Chasers.
Welcome back to Go, Go, Grow. Today's show, we're going to be speaking with author, scientist, and serial entrepreneur, Dr. Charles McCarrick. He's the founder and president of MicroAnt LLC, an antenna design and manufacturing company here in Jacksonville, where we're filming at the Studio Podcast Suites, and also its subsidiary company, Core Composites. He recently wrote and published Lessons My Brothers Taught Me, it's right here, How to Transform Your Personal Qualities into a Successful Business, a story that provides raw, somewhat comedic, very honest insights into some of the most difficult times in the company's 20-year journey. And it's also humorously illustrated. So it's like one of the only business books that has nice illustrations to come along with it. So today we're going to be talking about scaling the team and what that looks like. Charlie, in your book, you introduce a framework called the 4S Transform. Can you talk about what the 4S's are and how they can be used by business leaders in their growing companies?
Sure. Good question and great place to start. And thank you for having me, by the way. This is my first time in a fancy studio doing a podcast. So this is really exciting. I came up with the 4S Transform well after I had been running the business. And I was looking back at the various elements of what it took to be a successful business. When I realized what you need to have a successful business is successful people, right? Because it's the people that are behind the business that bring it to life, that make it happen, make things go. And I broke it down, these elements, into the so-called 4S transforms. 4 because there's 4 of them. S because they all begin with the letter S, so it would make it easier to remember. And transform because the idea here is that you're transforming character of individuals into a company, the character of a company. Mm-hmm. The first of the 4 S's is salability, and this is a personal trait. Salability means what value you bring to any interaction, right? And life is all about interactions, and as business is all about transactions. And by bringing value means that people want to interact with you. They want to talk to you. They want to work with you. You exude all of these traits and character things that get people excited.
Can you give us a couple examples of like the most common traits that make people want to interact with you?
I think people, they see that you're transparent, open, honest, intelligent, you're committed to providing satisfaction and satisfying their problem. It's really the same thing you look for in a friend, right? Somebody that you can count on, somebody that's going to be faithful and loyal, somebody that's going to help you when the chips are down, and also celebrate, your accomplishments as well. So salability is really a personal trait, and it's what you essentially emote out to others.
Okay.
The second of the 4 S's is sensibility, and this is also a character trait, meaning this pertains to human character, and it's in the opposite direction. These are the things that you draw in from your external environment. Sensibility means situational awareness of what's taking place. Like you're in a room with a number of different people. Quickly, you can tell the people who you want to interact with, who the leader is, who is saying intelligent things, who is bringing value. But also, if you're going to be starting a business, you need sensibility as to how you're going to succeed. What's your product? Is it a product that's going to be in demand that people are going to want? How are you going to market it? What's the competition? Who your customer is going to be? So these are things that you essentially bring in from situational awareness.
So you have to be sort of like curious and listeners, what I'm hearing, in terms of being able to get that information.
That's exactly right. And it doesn't hurt to be detail oriented, to pick up this information, pick up more and more data, because data successfully assimilated, right, becomes intelligence, right? And intelligence is how we make our decisions. So how we make good decisions anyway.
It sounds like the first trait speaks a little bit to right brain,
That's
and the second one is certainly left brain.
you know, you are brilliant. And you're hitting it right. I didn't want to get too deep in it, but that had crossed my mind before. But I never wanted to explain it that way because
Yeah.
people would look at me cross-eyed and said, "This guy thinks he's a psychologist now."
Well, it's true that somebody that is part of a team, they really need to have that balanced approach so that they can interact with and relate to the other members of the team. And of course, that means internal as well as external. So I love how you've broken that down.
Thank you. And the next, the third of the 4S transform is sustainability. Now, this is more of a company, a company characteristic, meaning that to be sustainable is essentially you're able to propagate, you're able to move forward, you're able to stay alive, right? And for a business to be sustainable, that usually means that you've established a product, you've established an employee base, a customer base, and you're doing business, right? And you know that you have a pretty good sense that you're going to wake up tomorrow and still be able to do business, and that will continue on into the future. So sustainability, of course, is what makes a company a company.
Is that a purely financial metric? Because we often talk about sustainability in terms of finances, or there's more to it?
I've seen many a company that was sustainable that was always in the loss margin. So, I mean, profit helps and it's great. And eventually you want to be there, but you can still be a pretty sustainable business without making a profit. Even large companies, they'll post losses in a quarter and maybe another quarter they'll make up for it. So they'll do this kind of a thing. But you would never argue that that company wasn't sustainable over the long term.
So what's the other piece of what is it at the core that's making it sustainable?
The thing that's making it sustainable is that you have the ability to execute your business plan. Now, let's say that it's me and a lawnmower, okay? And the lawnmower breaks down. That's not a sustainable business, okay? If it's me and two lawnmowers, all right, now I can, the business is more sustainable. Now, what if I get sick? It's not a sustainable business. So I have to have at least two lawnmowers, both the machine and the person that's pushing it, right? So sustainability generally means that you have a plan in place, and that plan is probably going to include employees or team members and skills that are overlapping in such a way that it doesn't rely on one individual. If you have any kind of a business that relies on one individual, it's not a business. It's a job.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby. It's a hobby. And some hobbies make money, right?
Yeah.
And they can become businesses more or less. But in reality, it's a job. Sustainability brings you beyond the job. Sustainability means you have a business that is sustaining and providing a lot of jobs.
Let me share a real world example here. Okay, so one thing that everyone will get to know about me is I'm a football fan. I love football, any form of football. So when the NFL when the USFL spun off from the NFL, everybody was so excited. I can remember arena football. If you think way back into we're not going to say what decade. And then, the USFL has kind of struggled a little bit. And then the XFL came out a couple years ago. It had a great impact until it didn't. So recently the two have merged. Now there's definitely a demand for football in America. So the appetite is sustainable. The market is sustainable. So the question here is, how do you make it financially sustainable? How do you continue to track that market? So that's a sales and marketability, sustainability question. And in the competitive market, the USFL's been around. The NFL's been around for a while. They have an established fan base. The USFL and XFL, which have recently merged, so they're doing that to try and be sustainable. They compete in the spring, so that helps. But if you're not seeing a sustainable path, you've got to adapt. And I'm sure you have seen that in your business and in the businesses you've watched.
That's absolutely right. And you bring up a really good point, because if you're selling essentially the same product and you're marketing it the same, why would some of these leagues be successful and others not? And ultimately it's the consumer that decides what's going to be successful. And as they say, if the dog won't eat the dog food, right, it's not going to sell. That's all there is to it. So you can do all the things right in terms of sustainability, but in the end, if you didn't approach it with the sensibility, right, of making this a success, then you're missing a key ingredient. You can't just jump into one of these four S's and say, okay, it's sequential. One feeds upon the other. It's almost a cyclic. That's why I call it a transform, because together you're going to transform into the success. So obviously some key element was missing there. And if you can't get someone to like something that they aren't going to like, but if you have sensibility, you should be aware of that ahead of time, that it's not going to succeed.
And then look at the analytics under everything else, the sensibility, the saleability. You've got it all handled. But there's a fourth S. What could that be?
The fourth S is scalability, right? And scalability, you think of the word scale, and scale, you think of terms, well, it means to grow or shrink or to change in size. And the operative word there was growth, right? But I don't necessarily mean growth when I talk about scalability. Scalability can be growth, and it can be a benefit of scaling, but there's other ways of scaling. I'll give you an example. When we thought that we were growing the business, and we had reached an inflection point where we were going to bring on more customers and more revenue by adding more employees. But instead, we fell flat on our face because we did not have a good scalability plan. We didn't have a good scalability plan because every plan begins with an objective. Right?
Yes.
And every objective begins with a desire, a need, right? You can't say, my objective is simply to earn more money. But why do I want to earn more money? There's got to be more to it than that. For instance, a scalability plan could also be, well, look, I'm going to keep the same employees that I have. I'm going to keep the same burden and burn rate for the company, yet I'm going to be more efficient. I am going to provide the same quality and the same quantity for half the price. Or you could say, I'm going to increase the quantity without compromising on quality and keeping, maybe the price comes down, and I'm going to do that with the same team. That's truly scaling up. If you double the size of the employee base and you double the size of the revenue and your bottom line is the same, I don't call that scaling. I call that just, growing. I call that's more like the viral effect, right?
Or so what happens even more often as you add more people, you have other expenses that increase as well.
Oh, that's right.
And so you're not necessarily taking advantage of the larger size. You're actually decreasing your margins.
Definitely diluting it.
That's
in which case, you're scaling down, actually, even as you're supposedly.
You're still scaling, but maybe not in the direction you want.
Inverse.
That's right.
Well, scalability, I have a lot of favorite words, and that's definitely one of them. And this podcast is essentially a coaching podcast to help scale SMBs into the next level, however they define that next level. But a lot of our listeners and viewers, I'm sure, are kind of at that, okay, but am I still an SMB or am I scaling? And I'm sure you've found that in your company, MicroAnt, and of course you've founded and led other companies as well. So if you could kind of give us an idea of when you saw, I'm not really a startup anymore. I'm a scale up. I have different needs. I have different goals. I need to change my plan. I need to change the leaders in my company. I now have needs I didn't have. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I can sit here and I might seem wise because I have lived through it, but let me tell you, when I was going through it, I wasn't that wise, right? I have the benefit of looking at this in the rearview mirror and being able to analyze it. But at the time, it was a bit chaotic. But one of the first things I'll ask somebody if they were to say to me, and I've been asked this question many times, how do I start a business? I say, well, now, why is it that you want to start a business? What are you looking to do? What are you looking to accomplish? It's the same thing with scaling up your company or growing your company, almost any decision that you make regarding the company. Why do you want to do it? The why leads to the objective, and behind the objective, that is what generates the plan. Did I stop and ask myself, why do I want to scale? No. I mean, who doesn't want a bigger company with more employees and more money and right and industry recognition? I always said that we were just, the tail of the tiger, and the industry was the tiger just wagging us anywhere we wanted to go because they were the ones that making the decisions how we grew, what products we sell, what markets we went into. And in terms of our first foray into scaling the company, did we fall flat on our face? We fell hard. We had a customer come to us with an enormous purchase order for a job that a product that we had developed, and we knew that we could produce it, and we felt great about it. The mistake that we made is that we did not look and see what the use case for this. Did this customer actually have end users? And the answer was, no, not really. But even more egregious than that, this customer didn't have any money. Now, we didn't find this out until checks started bouncing. So we're off and running, right? We're kicking off, all our vendors, and we're taking the money out of our bank account, our personal accounts, and, woohoo, we're growing. And what happened was that vendors started saying, okay, we're on 30 net terms, time to, make good on these purchases. And we're going to our customers and say, hey, I don't have any money. Well, he thought he was going to sell this stuff somewhere down the line, and he was going to pay us out of the sales. I mean, if only, that'd be great if the business worked that way, but it doesn't.
Work on consignment.
No. So we became a bank, with giving unsecured credit. And so we were in a lot of trouble. So that wasn't scalability, but all the elements were there, right? We added a lot of customers. We added a lot of employees. We brought in a lot more equipment. We brought in a lot more materials and goods, right?
And had a big purchase order.
And we had, and I was going to say, and on the face of it, we tripled our revenue, right? More than we had done the 3 years. So everything was there, but was that scaling? No, right? So clearly there has to be a plan, and you have to understand, and you can't base it upon one particular customer or opportunity that comes along.
So one of the things I hear you bring up in that falling flat on your face story is that there's a scaling of risk that's going on as you scale your company. And so if you took on a small, for example, customer who didn't pay off, your risk was small. And so the growth maybe was small, but the risk was small. So if things went south, you didn't fall flat on your face. But when you grow and you're scaling, your risks also increase because you might be taking on more inventory, you might be taking on bigger customers, more difficult projects. How do you think about the risk aspect of the scaling then? What should entrepreneurs be doing to reduce the risk even as they're scaling?
Well, I hope you have a financial plan in place because you have to consider the economies involved. What you said about the risk also scaling, well, the risk is that it's one thing if you're building 100 of something and your layout is $1,000. Okay, $1,000 and you have access to it, the bank, in your own bank account, that's fine. But now you're doing 10 times that much. You need $10,000 to fund this project, and you don't have $10,000. Now you have to go out and get a credit, or you have to borrow it. Okay, now things get a little bit dicey. Who do you get the money from? Can you get it from a bank? Well, the bank is not going to just lend to a company, right? That's with an unsecured debt. So you either have to go to an equity lender, or you're going to have to go to a venture capitalist or Uncle Joe, right? And so all these things are risky because you have the money is what greases the skids and gets things moving. The risk was never in hiring the right people, building the product, making it successful, delivering it to the customer. The money was being financially viable throughout the entire process and be able to keep your head afloat until you were able to invoice.
So after the initial panic,
yes,
how long did it take you to recover from that and say, okay, we're going to tackle this?
Okay. Recover mentally? Never.
Well, the thing about painful lessons is you do not forget them. You do not repeat them.
Recover economically, it was about 3 to 6 months. We had a lot of other jobs that were going on to keep the boat afloat, but we had all this useless inventory that we had to hold while we while we did all this other work to try to pay for it. What we did was we told this customer, and in the end, he made commitments that he had to make. And we said, nothing is leaving this plant until you pay us, right? You want 10 units? We receive payment for 10 units, you get 10 units.
Yeah.
So it was, as I say, cash and carry, right? So, pay us, no net 30, net zero terms. That's what we did this customer until all inventory was gone.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. So that took about 6 months to get us whole again.
So talking about scaling, that can mean very different things to very different companies. A lot of it's based on industry, market, and like you mentioned, going back to the goals, why are you wanting to scale? So just to kind of put this in context, a lot of companies will say, we want to grow our revenue. We want to scale our revenue. Others will define that by headcount. Others will define it by number of locations or geographies. It may be entering new markets. I mean, there's just so many ways to define scaling. But when you decide what that goal is, how do you identify, okay, we need to, of course, now build a new culture. We've got to build a new team. We've got to design the organization we need. We've got to identify the traits of the leaders that we need, where our gaps are and what we've got to fill. Can you talk a little bit about some of the main maybe lessons that you've learned and some of the advice that you have?
Yeah, you're making a really good point, because you don't simply scale workforce. It's not as if I have 3 people, I'm going to duplicate these 3 people. They all come with individual personalities, traits, skills, and other things that they're going to bring to the business. So you have to hire really, really carefully. For me, I wanted to scale, not first and foremost because I wanted to have a larger profit or bring more revenue to the bottom line. It was that there were other technologies that I wanted to explore, and that was going to take internal research and development money. And I wanted to be able to, rather than just respond, be reactionary to our customers, I wanted to develop products that we knew that there was a demand for, and we would own all the intellectual property, and then we could sell out there to multiple customers. And in order to do that internal research and development, as you point out, we needed skills that we didn't have on board. So that meant we had to hire people that ordinarily would command a very high salary that we weren't going to be able to afford as a small fledgling business. And so to bring in these heavy hitters, both at the management level as well as on the teams and the technology and quality assurance, we knew that we had to put all of these departments together, and that was going to be expensive.
Yes.
And that in order to have a whole company that was truly sustainable, that was operating on a plan and everybody following the same processes, we had to get ourselves to a point where we were at a size, and I think you said 10 to 20 million. That is the sweet spot for many companies, small companies starting out. In that $10 to $20 range, that's when we sensed that we were ready to do this internal research and development. We were ready to have our CRM system, MRP system, and our quality systems all in place. And with those, once you have the systems in place, those define the different positions that you need on the team and the various leaders and the execution of that. That was the basis of a plan that formed our objective to scale. Now, scale, right, the objective was to get money, but behind that was, I wanted to do this internal research and development. And so all these other things had to happen at the same time.
So in your book, you have a couple different chapters. We're going to smush them together, but you have something on ineffective leadership. You also have something called Company CPR, which is a different story of falling flat on your face, as I understand it. And then you also have one about succession planning. And it sounds like there's sort of a root cause, effect, and then solutions. So can you talk through that time in your company where a total reorganization was needed? You needed to change the team up. And how did you know that that was a root cause of your problem? What were the signs, and what were the results of doing a reorg?
Okay. I have a chapter that's called Company CPR. I think that's what you're referring to. That is why I wrote the book. That is central and core to the book, and I wrote all the chapters around it.
Oh.
And the reason I started there because COVID had hit in 2019. I had a lot of free time on my hands. There was a lot of people who had to work remotely. And I was doing a lot of things at home. I was sewing up bags. I was, and I said, I was musing about all the problems that the company had and how we succeeded and got through them. And even during COVID, we were doing pretty good. And I said, yeah, I wonder if there's some formula. I wonder if this, how did this all happen? And I started writing this, and it turned into a chapter. And next thing I know, it turned into a manuscript, and it became a book. So it began with the company CPR, meaning that I was trying to bring the company back to life after we had made some major missteps. And the major missteps we made weren't technology-wise, weren't economic. They were in people that we had hired. Now, when I was the only person in the company, I was the CEO, I was the janitor, I was everything, right? you have to do all the roles.
Yeah.
And I always felt that my greatest value to the company was as a technologist, as the chief scientist. So I was always looking for people to take on those other roles that I held. And one of them was president, right? CEO of the company, somebody that was going to run the entire company. And so I went through a number of different starts. I would bring people in. It just didn't seem right. And as the company grew, I always found myself doing their job on top of it all. But finally, we hired somebody just prior to 2019, 2017, somewhere around there, who had on paper all the skills. And if you sat down and interviewed this person, you would agree this person had all the skills and charisma and everything that you would want in a president. Was an engineer, had a background in companies large and small, and was a technologist, understood the culture fairly well, we thought. The thing is, you always lead with a carrot, not the stick, right? And everybody will tell you lead with the carrot, right? And not the stick. This guy led with the stick. He took the carrot and he used it as a stick. That might be a nice guy, and I don't want to disparage him at all, but oh my gosh, did the company go to hell in a handbasket under the 2 years that we appointed him president.
And if I can just interrupt, I think what you describe in the book is that you found yourself hiding from him under a table as the owner of the company.
I was going to say, we don't have to get into all that, but it is in the book, so what are you going to do? Yes, that's true. He came marching into my office and he was always dragging people. His entire day was spent in meetings, and you avoided them because you're going to spend 3 to 4 hours in a meeting when you could be doing something else. And I'm working on a project, and I'm still, back then, I'm still in the path to getting the satisfying what we've developed, delivering to the customer. And I hear him because he stamps, around like a general, like Napoleon. I heard him coming, so I just ducked under the desk. And I hear him talking to the guy out there. I said, "Where's Charlie?" He's in his office. So I'm hiding, and he's stamping around. He's snorting, and he's looking around. I said, "Oh, please don't look under the desk."
That would be awkward.
No, the awkward part was the reality I had after I said, "You know something? I'm underneath this desk. I'm hiding, and he works for me." I said, "I'm the problem, right? So I said, okay, we have to do a reset here. And when I talked to different people and I realized how unhappy they were and how the culture had done this, I realized that the company was never so happy as that when I was the president. I don't know whatever. Maybe I'm a good, I'm a nice guy to get along with. I make coffee for people. I don't know what it is, but I understood people really, really well. So I think that I had the leadership that my company Microant needed at that time. So what I did was, we had some heart-to-heart talks, and eventually this person left. And we had talked about bringing in another person. I said, as president, to replace him. I said, before we do that, I am going to fix everything so that this person isn't coming into chaos. So I said, I have to find out what's wrong. Why is everybody down? Why are they complaining? Why are they pointing fingers at each other? And I met with every employee of the company. I sat down with each and every one of them. There were 76 people. I know this because I asked them what their favorite colors were, and I went home and I sold them a bag based on their 2 colors. So I had a meeting with them. I gave them the bag, and then we had a talk.
Oh, wow.
And so I was doing the math. 76 people, 76. How long? This is going to take a year to do. But actually, it only took about 2 months. And I met with everybody, and some of those people just outright crying. And those were the most successful ones because I learned something. I had no
empathy
idea.
there. There's relationship. Yeah.
I learned just how tightly things were wound up and how they had called this person a bully. and how they were always the so-called blame game. And I said, so there was that leadership, but with the one of the residual things of the leadership is because people were always acting in a self-preserving mode.
Mm-hmm.
They started creating silos.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to participate in any kind of process, or they started defining their own job descriptions. They defined other people's jobs, and so I had to break through all of that. I had to reestablish. I called quality assurance in. We went through all the processes and the planning all over again. I made sure that we had this within the management. We had a culture of being process and planning oriented. No more silos. We had, we were talking earlier about a CRM system. Rather than this person and that person and this other individual having a little spreadsheet where they kept information that was never shared, it had to go into a common database where everybody had access to it, everybody saw it, and everybody could use it. Because then, right, it becomes a company resource and not an individual resource. And at those silos, you got to break them down, and you got to break them down in a hurry. So those are the main things. That it's not as if I made any promises to people or I patted them on the back or any of that stuff. I just listened, found the things that were wrong, broke down the silos, put processes in place, because everybody wants to know at the end of the day they've done something valuable and that they're appreciated. And that's what we made sure happened.
So I had two thoughts from that. First of all, you used a word that Dasha and I use constantly, and that's a silo. And silos can be very dangerous for companies for that very reason. They have their own resources, their own knowledge, tribal knowledge. They have their own often goals and strategies. But in your case, because of the culture, it wasn't so much a silo as a foxhole. And that's just as bad.
Because I was hiding in the foxhole, you're right.
But that's just as bad, because then you are equally either on the offensive or the defensive. You're never collaborating.
No, you hit the nail right on the head. If you're not collaborating, then you're not performing as a team.
Yeah.
If you're not performing as a team, what kind of culture
Can
you possibly have? And if you don't have culture, you don't have a company. I said, a business, right? And you have a company. A business is the interactions that you do. Those could be, listed down on paper, right, in a spreadsheet. But a company is a living, breathing, sustainable thing that has a culture, and it's the human factor that turns a business into a culture and brings life to it. So I'd never heard of the foxhole before, but if I had,
it just popped up.
I would have put that in the book, because you're right. It wasn't that there's you see this. Oh, look at the silo; it's filled with corn, right? And we're keeping it away from the cows. But a foxhole, right? Those are hidden. Those are meant to be. These silos were hidden, and you had to go, like an Easter egg hunt and say, okay, where is this silo? And you would find them. You wanted to find the silo. Everybody had them. They're collecting their own information because it was a mechanism for self-preservation.
Well, I know Dasha has a great question for you, but I had one other thought that I wanted to share. My favorite color is purple. I like bags too.
Well,
good to know.
So the systems and the silo thing, I also wanted to add a comment. So I was reading a report recently about knowledge workers, and it talks about, how people spend like 10 to 20% of their time searching for information within their own company. Right. And so if you have siloed information that's siphoned off into different departments in a small company, people are going to be doing that. That shouldn't be happening in a small company where people can come and talk to each other, and where, everybody, the systems are, you're using a relatively small number of systems relative to maybe like a 10,000 person company, where of course it's hard to even fathom how you unite everybody exactly the same way. But you mentioned that you've also now implemented a CRM system. And this is something Michelle and I talk a lot on the podcast about, because both of us truly believe that this is undervalued by many companies, and also that it should be one of the first things you implement in your company, because you're going to be doing business, you're going to be trying to find customers, so you should have that information stored in some way that isn't an Excel spreadsheet. Can you talk about how you decided to implement it and what's changed in your business as a result, just as a little practical tip for the people listening, because we hammer this all the time, so we want to see if we're justified.
Okay. I think in the book I said one of the biggest mistakes I made early on is that I did not pay attention to accounting. I didn't have a good accounting system. let me, I should expand on that. I don't mean accounting just in terms of doing the financial spreadsheets for the IRS. I'm talking about accounting of all data, right, within the company, and and making sure that you have the data in the proper place and available to everybody else. And the key data that you have is those that involve customers and marketing, right?
Mhm.
The bread and butter, all right. That's your CRM system, and you want to know who your customers are, and you want to know what you can sell to them, what you have sold to them, because that's the template for how you're going to do business development. How you're going to grow the company. You're not going to do it without that. That's for sure. An MRP system, materials resource planning. Every article within the confines of the company, you should know where it is. You should know what the access to it, and you should know what its value is. The last thing you want is a bunch of inventory, either work in progress or other equipment, piling up, and you do your books and you find out you have $2 or $3 billion in inert, materials. Right? I mean, that's money that that you need to get out of the door. And the other database that, of course, is the accounting end of it, but that's usually connected to the MRP system, is whatever the technology or whatever it is that is proprietary to the company that allows you to sell your product, whatever. We're a technology company and communications, so that would be all of the engineering data.
If I can add on to that, you need to have an audit, a recordable audit, and somebody responsible for owning it of what technology you have throughout the entire company, who has access to it, how many licenses you have, how many pieces of hardware you have. And when somebody leaves the company, you need to track that they lose access.
Yes.
That's exactly right, especially if you want to be a company that's going to work with Department of Defense contractors.
Yes.
Right? You have to
Or
have
healthcare.
and healthcare,
Yes.
right? You're going to have these measures in place, especially security measures, which we do. And if you have a good quality assurance manager, and better yet, a department in place, then you're going to have the necessary certifications that will make sure that not only that you're delivering a product of quality to the customer, but that you're following all these other practices, that you have plans and processes in place that you're following. And those processes and planning is going to include asset tracking, which could be computers, keys, software,
Exactly.
and the like, right? You want to know where all of these things are. And you made a comment earlier about, the worst thing in a small company is looking for where something is. We, in my company, in our company, we have, people who follow process and planning to the letter. And I will ask a person a question, but if I ask them a question, I'm asking them a question for information that I know that is in their realm that they should have. I won't ask an engineer for a question, an accounting question. I won't go to accounting question and ask them, about some business development question, So I know that which person I can go to. And there in my company, there are 3 people I can go to and get everything that any kind of information that I need, whether it's, hey, I brought my propellers in, for my boat and I set them down. I don't know where they are. I know the person who's going to know where they are. Or if I'm going to say, hey, we sent out this product to this one customer. Have they evaluated yet? If not, when will they evaluate it? If so, what is the feedback? And I know which person I can go to and get those answers to. So you have to have all of that data and information at your fingertips, and it can't be ephemeral, right? It has to be in a database because somebody else could take my place, or that person's place, or that person's place. But the data, right, has to be consistent. It has to, like, if my entire business development business team leaves, what happens? Well, the thing is, we still have the CRM system there, right? And anybody who's qualified in marketing or sales or in business development will go right in there
Right.
and know what to do, and we'll marry that up to the technology.
Well, Charlie, that's fantastic. And thank you for coming on our show. I just want to let our listeners know that you can find links to Charlie's book and his blog, as well as his companies, in our show notes.
I do want to go back to one small little detail. When you talked about scaling, and because you're a technology-based company, you have that specific level of knowledge that you need to add. Someone with specific expertise, when you need to scale, you need to add them to your leadership team. And you mentioned that sometimes that knowledge can come at a price.
Yes.
And a lot of our audience may not have that price times however many individuals with expertise they need. Dasha, as many of you have realized and may already know, she has worked with a lot of technical industry, biomedical, satellite, defense, any type of pharmaceutical, any type of go-to-market that is highly technical. When they have those special needs and they know their science, they know their technology, they don't necessarily know strategy and commercialization, and they can't afford a full-time strategist. That's when a fractional expert could possibly be the solution to your problems. Did you ever bring in anyone as a subject matter expert on a less than full-time basis, Charlie?
Yes, we did. We did not call it fractional at the time, but that's exactly what they were doing. They would come in as a consultant or an advisor, even an intern. To some degree, could be considered fractional because uh, they are taking a fraction of a particular problem, right, which they're working on, they're dedicated to, and they're solving. To your point, you're right. We had this person eventually became our CEO. There was no way we could afford this person's salary. And to this day, he's probably making half of what he was earning before he joined the company. And there was, we weren't going to be able to pay him. So it's simple. He would be an advisor. We would compensate him. Maybe he would work for a fraction of the time, say maybe 3 months out of a 12-month calendar year. And we could get the benefit of that skills for when we needed it and that expertise, but without having to bring on somebody that would command that kind of salary. So yes, we bring in more and more that will be working with our fractional people. And, this could be a 2 or 3 month assignment, but sometimes it could be a 2-hour session and you could learn a lot from it. So
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of this, I would say, this fractional new wave and this push, especially for small companies. It's a resource that I really wish that had been available to me about 20 years ago.
And one thing I want to point out, and I'm actually just discussing this with one of my clients who's growing and they're a startup. Sometimes you need a person to be executing a plan daily, picking up the phone, moving the box, shipping the thing, doing the design. Sometimes you need to set up a system, for example, for the first time. And maybe the person who's really good at doing the work every single day, who's maybe wearing 10 hats, maybe they're not the best person to design a whole brand new system, right? And you only need to do that design phase once. And so that's a great opportunity to bring in somebody. So if you're setting up your supply chain for the first time, you might want a person who has a lot of experience, has been in a management position at a bunch of different companies. But if you have somebody who then runs that system, you don't necessarily need that same level of design capability. They can just be an advisor that the person that executes the plan, has contact information for, and when things arise that they need advising for. And that way you're also able to develop your internal talent, while for special occasions you might need help with the design or that executive level position. So
when I got more involved in the fractional world, and of course, the clients I work with, it could be on that couple hour consultation. It could be a short-term project. It could be a fractional role, whatever that client needs. But when I first started really interacting with and networking with other fractionals, what I heard a lot was, well, how can a fractional CFO who's only with our company 10 hours a week, how can they possibly be effective? I need that CFO 40 hours a week. Okay, in that 40 hours that you have a full-time CFO, how many unnecessary meetings are they in?
Well, there's that, but Dasha just answered the question.
Yeah.
That person will come in and set up a system for you so that somebody who maybe they don't have that experience, maybe they don't command that kind of a salary, maybe they're at an entry level, can run the system, because it's much easier to run a system than to try to synthesize it and then try to bring this all together and stitch it together as part of the company. But what you said about, and you talked about supply chain, that's exactly what we did. We had somebody come in who knew about, they had been retired, they were looking for another job, but they had a extensive background in setting up a supply chain in vendor management. And they came on and we established that process, and quality came in and documented it so they would have repeatability, and then we were able to get entry level people to to just were good and articulate on the phone to be able to call and order and manage and manage our vendors. So that's how you do it, right?
Yeah.
They set up the system.
And it makes perfect sense on the other side as well, because the people who are really good at setting up systems, who have the lots of experience, they don't necessarily want to be doing the daily calling either. So they don't
Right.
want to be in a role that's where half their day is bookkeeping and the other half is being a CFO. They actually want to spend more time being strategic, financially setting up systems, coaching the next level of financial leadership. So
And helping you achieve your long-term financial strategy, not preparing your quarterly taxes.
That's exactly right.
Okay, well we've had so much information. I appreciate you introducing me to Charlie. It's been wonderful meeting you.
It was my pleasure. This is wonderful. I love this studio.
Studio Podcast Suites,
Here, it's in Jacksonville.
town center area.
Yeah, wonderful place.
Yeah, love it. Okay. Well, thanks, guys. It was a real
Thank you.
pleasure. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Go Go Grow is found across all major podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. We'll see you on the next episode. And also, please join us for our office hours. You'll find details in our show notes.